Hi, I'm Molly McGlennon. I'm an associate professor of English and Native American Studies. I also serve as the director of American Studies here at Vassar College. And today I want to talk a little bit about my most recent project, which culminated in a collection of poems entitled Our Bearings that just came out this past January 2020 from the University of Arizona Press, in order to articulate a bit about what experiential research and creativity mean in this present moment, and how this process allowed me, after having written this collection, to reflect more deeply upon the long historical ties between Indigenous resistance and Black resistance, and in particular with the Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically how decolonial research, labor, and practice have always been connected to anti-racist work. And hopefully that will be made evident as I move forward. I want to say before I start that I am Ojibwe. On my mom's side, I was born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota. All of my family continues to reside there. I go back often. And Minneapolis is a place, as you probably know, of diaspora and relocation for many Native peoples, like so many cities in the US. And much of my research throughout my career has been focused on what Native American urban experience means. So I think one of the misconceptions that people have is that Native urban peoples are dislocated peoples, that we're sort of lost in the city, and that we're only the sort of products of the relocation policies of the 1950s that the US government enacted to bring us off the reservation into the cities. And this idea of dislocation, it got me thinking that dislocation or relocation are actually incomplete and inaccurate terms to really think about Native peoples in the city, that we've been there for a very long time. I'm 4 generations in, and in fact, we've always been there, right? If you think about Indigenous peoples on this continent. So I had a good friend in grad school, Ben Burgess, who's also Ojibwe, who was also born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we were talking about this very issue, and he said to me that we have to have a homeland, and for this to happen in the city, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe people, must claim the city as their territory. And this got me thinking about this idea of claiming, because of course we know in the Western sense, claiming can be a term that's very divisive and violent and exploitative, you know, claiming land or claiming lives. But I was thinking about it in writing my collection in this Indigenous way. It's that it's a landscape that's inclusive and relational and intertribal and allows for a sense of belonging, not exclusion. And of course, this honors the long historical moral title Native peoples have always had to that place, to the land. So my collection came into being sort of in 2 ways, constructing the poetry itself. On the one hand, I had these prose poems, these long lines that are poems that are very storied, and they tell the personal stories of Minneapolis. On my mom's side, as I said, we're Ojibwe, and she's one of 8 children, and many of her brothers and sisters were construction workers that helped build the Minneapolis skyline. And on my father's side, my dad, for the most part, for most of his life, identified as Irish French American. We did a bunch of archival work in the Minnesota Historical Society Library, where it was revealed to him through extensive documents between the state of Minnesota and his great-grandparents, showing that his grandma and her sisters were stolen as children, were dumped at the Owatonna School for Independent and Neglected Children, and later outed to white farmers in their early teens. They were Métis people. Later, that white farmer, after his wife died, married my dad's grandma, she in her late teens and he in his early 50s. And my dad's grandma would raise my dad on the west side of Minneapolis in the 1940s. So these poems tell these sort of hidden stories of the city that are Indigenous stories. And then braided with those stories in the collection, there's more visually experimental or lyrical poems that attempt to express the ecosystem of the city. That includes not only the people and their stories, the history, culture, but also the voice of the land, the plants, water, spirit, ancestors, having a presence in that place, a voice in that place. So in my experiential research to write these poems, I took many trips back to Minnesota, to Minneapolis, now with 2 little kids by my side, thanks to a couple grants from Vassar College, and to tour some old places, some old stomping grounds, and some new places too. Places like Fort Snelling, which was the Dakota encampment, Bede-Makaska, which used to be Lake Calhoun, the Snake River, where I canoed growing up as a little kid, and First Avenue, places like First Avenue, Princess Club, places like that. So I'll read just a few poems from my collection to exemplify what I've just talked about. Many of the poems are serialized in the book, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll read just a few poems from across the sections. There's 4 sections, which are the 4 elements: earth, air, water, and fire. And I hope to show that my book tries to, of course, tell the stories of Indigenous Minneapolis, map those stories, why these stories matter, and the beauty in them, from family stories of stolen children to building a city skyline like I just spoke about, to broader histories of Ojibwe and Dakota and Métis, centuries-old, hard-fought resistance that continues to this very moment in the wake of George Floyd's murder. When we see the continent as Indigenous, when we see a city as Indigenous, we understand colonialism. We understand this country as invasion. To name just one form of resistance, we see the birth of the American Indian movement, which was in Minneapolis, not as a single episode in history, but a continual response to that invasion. And we count clearly the reasons Ojibwe and Dakota folks in Minneapolis forge alliances today with Black Lives Matter, among other forms of Indigenous resistance. I'm going to read one of those series of poems, beginning with Bering's 1, which is a story. My cousins and I play cards with my grandma, become accustomed to the buzz of the wobbling floor fan set to the highest speed. She is waiting for her daughters, my aunties, to come home. They've worked construction all summer. Their brothers, iron workers, crane and elevator operators, tip them off about the jobs. The 2 would hold the stop and slow signs for oncoming traffic through heat and rain and clouds of dirt. Now they walk in, pull off bandanas full of sweat, which have been wrapped around their foreheads all day. They wear dust-covered jeans and boots, and like always, Maybelline fake eyelashes full of thick black mascara. This time, one of my aunts is crying, and as she's crying, I watch her try to pull off those fake eyelashes. She's saying something about getting fired, and in between her weeping and cursing, and something about being fed up with the comments from the guys at the site, about her jeans and her sleeveless t-shirt, and how she'll go back to waitressing, even though construction pays more, and how she and her sister should give this up for good. It's only seasonal. But come spring, like my uncles, they will each step out from the long Minnesota winter and get in line with all the rest, wanting something better and hoping this time they won't catch anyone's eye, and this time keeping their heads down a little lower. Bering's 2, this is for my Uncle Mike. It wasn't in the kitchen where she heard phone calls that make us fall to the floor, clutching the phone, 1,000 electric pulses in our chest letting off at once. Lose your bearings. It wasn't face to face with someone at the door, not this time. She was driving down First Street, heard the radio announcer mispronounce his name, her brother. He fell some 5 floors with 2 other men, elevator operators. A malfunction, she said. Those who built the skyline, paved the roads, bore the ditches, who worked 10 stories up and deep down in manholes. The invisible who made all visible. The bearings that enable her to grip the steering wheel and hold her breath until home. Bearings 3. The relevance of this: a loon stays underwater for several minutes, dives for food as deep as murky lake bottom, or protection. Tremolo echo knows home and surfaces and the runways of water. Could be leeches, smelt, minnows. Nest never far from water's edge, moss and pine needles. A pair tends to this quiet, their natal lake. Again and again, a life of returning. I'm going to read one more story poem and then talk a bit about and reflect a little bit about that poem. This is Development 2. As children, we learned that my father grew up on the west side, saw the building that was once the corner store he bagged groceries at after school. The block now readies itself for chic luxury apartments that no one who survived the Vietnam era could ever afford. And it was on the north side that my mother would waitress and meet the army officer, handfuls of straws standing up from her apron pocket. There always switched the story of who offered whom the first cigarette. My brother would be born on the south side, that one-room apartment. He might have slept in a drawer that first year. And there's the story of the cradle in which my sister and I, at different points, would be laid down to sleep each night. I'm told we've circled this city for a very long time. Eventually, we moved out to Western Fringe, where my dad would get a job at Honeywell building Mark 46 bombs for the war during the day, attending law school at night on his GI Bill. This may be where he first met the Belcourts and the Banks. Honeywell was friendly to Indians at first, until some organized. Every Christmas, John B. calls from prison. We still run into Clyde at IDS Crystal Court. Marks another year, our calendars of comings and goings, of jail time and freedom, car crashes and diplomas, war and sobriety. Like a glint, the gesture of story incites our designs, the directions we know to be constant with who we are, right there, always there. I just wanted to say that because all my family and many of my old friends are still in Minneapolis, I was getting a lot of updates since the George Floyd murder. And of course, the American Indian movement, the Minneapolis Native community has never gone away and has been helping to protect and sustain the neighborhood, the Phillips neighborhood, and of course ally with Black Lives Matter folks. And after the McGeezy Center was burned down, this was a nonprofit organization that started in the late 1970s that had the goal of countering the misrepresentations and the inaccuracies about Native peoples in the media with a focus on empowering youth to do this work. After that was burned down, I got a video from a friend who on one of the first nights of the protests, a night where looting was happening, right? And after the governor had said that many of the looters he believed were coming from out of state, Native peoples were patrolling their neighborhood and found some white boys from Wisconsin looting a liquor store. And they grabbed those white boys, put them down on the curb, filmed them, asked for their phone numbers, asked for their mom's phone numbers. And those moms from Wisconsin came and picked those boys up. And I thought, what an astonishing thing to see, to witness. It reminds us of how there have always been other ways to imagine and practice community. And Indigenous peoples have been living that for a very long time. They have a lot to teach the non-Indigenous world. And of course, intellectually, centering land knowledge and Indigenous peoples' knowledge, as my book tries to do, makes me think of the productive coalition between Indigenous peoples and Black peoples, fighting against colonial and racist systems which our country espouses. The foundation of the US, its wealth and its social fabric, how we see one another or not, right, is built upon the genocide of Indigenous peoples and the theft of their lands and the enslavement of Black people. So a line in one of my poems says, "Free land, free labor makes the rapacious few." And so if we are to reckon with this continuum of violence, our violent past and the continuance of this violence today, Indigenous and Black coalitions, decolonial and anti-racist frameworks urge all of us to question how and why some people are protected by those systems of violence and how others are left vulnerable to it. So I'll end with just one more poem, Remains 2, as a way to sign off and a way to call attention to a hopeful thing, a victory, a most recent victory over banishing, finally, the derogatory Native NFL mascot in the US Capitol. This is called Remains 2. There are ways we never talk about what is right in front of us, too afraid, or like a phantom limb, vivid perceptions of a fiction remain. You think and feel the severed portion still attached. One of my diabetic uncles recently had half of his leg amputated. He is the youngest boy of my grandparents' 8 children, lives in Northeast and not truck driving anymore. He used to deliver milk all over the Twin Cities area, and I heard he is still not sober. The Christmas he came late to my auntie's duplex in St. Paul, my sister and I slid in our socks on the old wood floors, trying not to draw attention to ourselves. We got cornered in the tiny kitchen. I was teased for thoughts of going to college, and my sister for practicing and performing her violin. We put food on our plates and slipped out. I asked my mom how he gets around now. I don't know, she said. A cane, a chair, a fake leg. A fiction, I think. It rests in the outline of our absences, slipping in and out of rooms, living one piece at a time on that plate in our memories, until the only connective tissue is the stories we have of ourselves. In this story of us, however, we are not ghosts. We are not diabetics or the first college grad or a creaking floorboard or truck drivers. We are not the youngest or the oldest, sober or drunk. We are not severed or whole, cities or suburbs. We are not what they call us, nor what we call ourselves. We are only what we want to say. So I've seen poetry as a vehicle to tell and tell again what is undeniably and crucially indigenous to this land. And my poems are the stories of Native peoples shaping their own future rather than the ones being acted upon by colonizing ideologies and racist federal laws, policies, and campaigns. I'm not certain what Minneapolis will look like in years to come. I am certain that indigenous knowledge is crucial to this planet's future, as the logics of extraction and monoculture are almost ensure its endpoint. And I remind all of us to remember the importance of listening to indigenous peoples and their knowledges, especially in this historical moment. Thank you for listening.